Earth was marked as the next target. The council chamber on Threx Prime was cold in a way that felt deliberate, as if even heat had learned not to linger there. Black stone walls swallowed the glow of the holographic star maps suspended above the chamber floor. The air carried the smell of metal and old dust. This was where the Galactic Dominion decided which species would live free and which would serve, and for 11,000 years no one had questioned the verdicts spoken in that room. Grand Arbiter Vorith Kessin stood at the center beneath the floating stars. Tall even for his own insectoid kind, wrapped in dark armor-like skin, he looked less like a ruler than something carved out of the same merciless stone around him. His 4 black eyes moved across the map without interest. Each light represented a world. Each world already had a number. Each number already had a fate, and one more glowing point was about to join the dead certainty of the rest. Next, he said. The command carried no force in volume. It did not need to. A small figure hurried forward from the edge of the chamber. Scribe Leon of the Mari kept her head lowered as she approached, clutching a data tablet in 2 trembling hands while the other 2 pressed tight against her chest. Her people had been conquered long ago. Now they recorded the paperwork of conquest for others. Species 4217, she said carefully. Located in the Outer Rim. A planet called Earth. The local species calls themselves humans. Vorith did not turn. Classification. Class 2. Early technology. The last full survey was conducted 214 years ago. At that time they possessed basic nuclear capability and no meaningful space travel beyond their own moon. One of Vorith's long arms moved in a gesture so casual it felt cruel. Standard harvest. Assign a fleet. Leon froze. It lasted only a second, but in this chamber hesitation was louder than rebellion. Vorith's eyes shifted toward her, and suddenly she looked very small under the black stone ceiling. There is something unusual in the file, Grand Arbiter, she said. Unusual. The electromagnetic readings from their system have changed significantly since the last scan. Their energy output is far beyond what a Class 2 civilization should produce. It is possible the data is outdated. They may have advanced further than we. Vorith finally looked at her. His eyes were empty pits. Leon felt her throat close under the weight of them. I have overseen the harvest of 300 species, he said. Every one of them believed they were special. Every one of them was wrong. Assign the fleet. The words fell like a seal stamped on a death warrant. Leon lowered her head at once. Yes, Grand Arbiter. Her hands shook as she entered the order. 10,000 warships. A full harvester fleet under Fleet Commander Draxus Moore. Estimated arrival at the target system, 40 standard rotations. Expected resistance, negligible. Expected operation length, less than 3 days. Routine. Entirely routine. The chamber moved on before the command had even settled into the archive. Another world had been chosen. Another species had been numbered. 6,000 light-years away, on a small blue planet circling an ordinary yellow star, routine was about to die. Beneath the Himalayan mountains, hidden so completely that no satellite could see it and no signal could touch it, a room full of screens flickered with streams of alien text. This was the listening post of the Void Wardens, Earth's most secret military branch. For 60 years they had been intercepting, recording, and decoding transmissions from the Galactic Dominion. The Dominion had never known anyone was listening. It had never imagined that a primitive species on the Outer Rim had been watching every order it sent into the dark. Dr. Ian Hallow sat before the largest screen, thin shoulders hunched, gray hair catching the cold blue light. Around him, 12 analysts worked in complete silence. They had learned
Orders
that when
confirmed.
Hallow stopped
Execute the
moving,
attack pattern
something
Delta
important had
immediately.
happened. He read the intercepted deployment order once. Then again. Then a third time. By the fourth reading the room around him had gone still enough to hear breathing. "Get me Admiral Drake," he said softly. 20 minutes later Admiral Soren Drake entered the chamber. He was not a physically large man, but the room changed shape around him anyway. His face was hard, marked by scars from battles no civilian would ever hear about. His gray eyes were calm in a way that unsettled other people. For 15 years he had commanded the Void Wardens. For 15 years he had turned Earth's hidden defenses into something no one on the surface even knew existed. Hallow put the translated message on the main screen. A Dominion harvester fleet. 10,000 warships. Destination, Sol. Mission, conquest. Expected resistance, none. No one spoke. One analyst finally whispered, 10,000 ships. Drake read every line. Fleet composition. Command authority. Arrival estimate. Tactical posture. He reached the end of the report and smiled. It was not relief. It was not excitement. It was the expression of a man who had spent his life building an answer to one question and had just been told the question was finally coming. 60 years, Drake said quietly. 60 years of watching. 60 years of building. 60 years of asking what happens when they finally come for us. He looked up at the officers waiting around him. Now we find out. For a long moment, no one in the listening post moved. The translated deployment order remained on the main screen, cold and clinical, reducing Earth to a numbered target with an arrival window and an assumed level of helplessness. 10,000 ships. Routine conquest. Minimal resistance expected. It was the kind of message written by a power that had forgotten what uncertainty felt like, and as the analysts stared at it, that arrogance seemed to press against the walls of the underground facility like another form of gravity. Admiral Drake kept reading. Not because he needed to understand the order. He already did. He read it again because he wanted every person in that room to feel what the Dominion had really sent. Not merely a fleet. Not merely a threat. A verdict. Somewhere, 6,000 light-years away, strangers in a black stone chamber had looked at Earth and decided its future in less time than it took to finish a meal. When Drake finally lifted his eyes from the screen, the silence had changed. It was no longer shock. It was focus. Activate Protocol Prometheus, he said. No alarms sounded. No red lights flashed. The order moved through the facility in whispers, then through buried fiber lines and sealed quantum relays, then into the sleeping machinery hidden across the solar system. Officers who had trained for this moment their entire adult lives suddenly found their hands unsteady on their consoles. Scientists who had spent decades designing weapons no one had been allowed to name sat straighter in their chairs. Across 100 compartments beneath the mountain, systems that had waited in silence for years began to wake. Protocol Prometheus was not one plan. It was all of them. Hidden fleets sealed inside shadow docks. Weapons platforms disguised as dead rock. Billions of autonomous drones packed into hollowed asteroids. Cloaked sensor grids drifting in cold darkness beyond the outer planets. Solar relays buried in positions so deep and dangerous that most of the engineers who designed them had never seen the finished work. Humanity had spent 60 years preparing for a war it prayed would never arrive. Now every buried answer was being pulled from sleep at once. Dr. Hallow watched status indicators turn from dark to live across the wall display. He could see activation chains spreading outward through the system like veins filling with light. They'll never believe it, one analyst murmured. Drake did not look at him. They don't need to believe it. The room fell quiet again. On the surface, Earth remained ordinary. Traffic crawled through cities. Cargo ships crossed oceans. Children slept. Governments argued over budgets and borders, unaware that somewhere beneath the mountains, a hidden branch of the species had just begun moving the greatest military machine the galaxy had never seen. Drake had chosen long ago that panic would not be humanity's first answer. There would be no global announcement. No broadcast to the public. No desperate speeches. The people of Earth would keep living their lives while others prepared to defend them in the dark. An hour later, the first preparation cycle was complete. The hidden fleets were awake. The drone reservoirs were live. The sensor lattice stretched across the solar system like an invisible net. Drake sat at the communications console and opened a secure outbound channel. Dr. Hallow watched him, then glanced toward the tactical display. "You're contacting the fleet?" Drake shook his head. He keyed in a frequency that no human civilization should have known existed. The Dominion's encrypted military channel. The same channel their officers believed had never been cracked by any species in galactic history. Hallo felt a chill as the access confirmation appeared on the screen. Even after 60 years of stolen listening, there was still something unreal about seeing Earth step into the enemy's private bloodstream. You think this will stop them? Hallo asked. No, Drake said. He began typing. His fingers moved without hesitation, each line spare and exact. He was not composing a plea, because he knew what the Dominion did with pleas. He was not composing an argument, because powers like theirs did not negotiate with the weak. What he wrote had to do only one thing. It had to make first contact on human terms. When he finished, Hallo read the words over his shoulder. To the commanders of the Dominion Harvester Fleet designated for Sol 3. We are aware of your mission, your fleet composition, your staging coordinates, and your rules of engagement. We have been aware for some time. This message is not a plea. It is not a negotiation. It is a courtesy. Do not come here. You will not be harvested. You will not be enslaved. You will simply cease to exist. This is your only warning. The Void Wardens of Earth. Hallo let out a slow breath. The whole galaxy will hear that if it leaks. Drake rested his hand above the transmission key. Yes, he said. And that matters. He pressed send. The message left Earth at light speed, invisible and unstoppable, slicing outward through the dark toward the approaching harvester fleet. But it was never meant for them alone. The moment it crossed into the enemy's channels, it became more than a warning. It became an announcement. Somewhere in the machinery of Empire, something impossible had just happened. A target species had spoken back. Not with fear. Not with surrender. With certainty. Hours later, on Threx Prime, Scribe Leon sat alone in her small quarters staring at the file for species 4217. The unease had not left her. If anything, it had deepened into something colder. She reopened the old survey data and began digging beneath the recent summaries, beneath the bureaucratic abstractions, beneath 2 centuries of neglect and omission. Record after record slid past her screen. Most were routine. Most were dull. Then at last she found a locked archival note attached to the original Earth survey. Its warning classification was so severe she had never seen its equal. Leon opened it, and the room around her suddenly felt much smaller. The warning classification sat at the top of the recovered note like a stain. Leon read it once and felt her hands go numb. Recommend permanent avoidance. Species exhibits anomalous aggression adaptation loop. Do not engage. She read it again more slowly, as if the meaning might soften under inspection. It did not. Beneath the warning were fragments from the original survey team, old enough that the language carried none of the polished arrogance of modern Dominion bureaucracy. The observers had not remained in orbit. They had gone down to the surface. They had watched humans closely enough to become frightened by what they saw. Not because humanity was the strongest species they had encountered, because it changed too fast. Every war accelerated its weapons. Every disaster hardened its systems. Every plague sharpened its medicine. Pressure did not merely damage the species. Pressure refined it. The surveyor had written that humans did not respond to existential threats the way normal civilizations did. They did not collapse in a predictable line. They reorganized, improvised, absorbed loss, then came back harder, faster, and far more dangerous than before. The final line was worse than the warning itself. Potential apex predator species if given time. Leon stared at the words until they blurred. That classification had only been used twice in Dominion history, and both times the cost of exterminating the species had nearly broken entire sectors. Someone had seen this report 2 centuries earlier and buried it. Someone had decided Earth was a problem for later. Someone had fed a lethal species into the machine of routine conquest and called it paperwork. She tried again to send a direct warning to Fleet Commander Draxus Moore. Authorization denied. The rejection returned instantly, stamped by the office of Grand Arbiter Vorith. Leon sat very still in the dark archive room, feeling the cold truth settle into her bones. The Dominion had not just made a mistake. It had made the kind of mistake old empires made when they had survived too long without being contradicted. Somewhere, a fleet of 10,000 ships was moving toward a planet it did not understand, and the one person in the bureaucracy trying to stop it had just been locked out. 2 light years from Sol, Commander Draxus Moore stood on the bridge of the Teeth of Obedience and watched his fleet hold formation in the staging dark. 10,000 warships surrounded his flagship in ordered silence. Massive carriers, harvester cruisers, escort screens, atmospheric suppression platforms. Enough force to crack worlds and empty cities in less than 3 days. He had commanded 40 campaigns for the Dominion and had never lost. Primitive systems did not frighten him. They bored him. A signals officer broke the stillness. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission." Draxus did not turn. "From Threx Prime." "No, sir." Only then did Draxus look over. The officer's pale face had gone tight. His hands shook over the console. "Source. Sol system," the officer said. "From Earth." A silence moved across the bridge so abruptly it felt like the air had been cut out of the room. "That is impossible," Draxus said. The officer swallowed. "There's more, sir. It arrived on our encrypted military frequency." Now even the veteran officers around the bridge had stopped pretending calm. That channel had never been breached. Not by rebels. Not by rival powers. Not by anyone. It was one of the quiet assumptions the Dominion stood on, like gravity and obedience and the certainty that weak species died when called upon to die. "Play it," Draxus said. The speakers crackled once. Then a human voice filled the bridge. Perfect Dominion Common. It did not sound afraid. It named the fleet. Its mission. Its composition. Its staging coordinates. Its rules of engagement. Each detail landed with surgical precision, not because it was shouted, but because it was correct. Then came the line that changed the temperature of the room. "This message is not a plea. It is not a negotiation. It is a courtesy." When the warning ended, no one on the bridge moved. Draxus kept his face hard, but behind his stillness something small and unwelcome had entered the room. Not fear. Not yet. Something more insulting than fear. Uncertainty. "A bluff," he said at last. "A frightened species trying to appear stronger than it is. They intercepted what they should not have intercepted and now they hope words will save them." No one answered. Draxus turned toward the forward display where Sol shone as a distant point in the dark. "We proceed as planned. Full combat readiness. Jump to target in 6 hours." The officers obeyed because that was what Dominion officers did. But the message had already done its damage. Not to the fleet's engines. Not to its weapons. To its certainty. Somewhere in 10,000 ships, crews were replaying that calm human voice and hearing the same impossible thing. The prey had spoken like a predator. And far from the harvester fleet, on Station Orin 4, a woman officially registered as a mineral trader listened to the same transmission and smiled without warmth. Ambassador Salem Marchetti had received the human warning 30 minutes before it was sent. Along with it came a single instruction from Admiral Drake. "Make sure the galaxy hears it." Marchetti rose from her cramped station quarters and moved toward the relay access shafts hidden behind the public communications hub. For 11 years she had lived on the station planting tiny devices inside its signal network, grains of sabotage too small to matter on their own. Now, one by one, she began to wake them. If the Dominion wanted Earth made into an example, then Earth had decided the example would begin early. The message spread faster than fear usually did. On Station Orin 4, Salem Marchetti stood inside a maintenance shaft no wider than her shoulders, one hand buried in exposed relay wiring, the other steady on a transmitter the size of her palm. Around her, the station hummed with trade traffic, docking clearances, tariff disputes, and the ordinary lies of an empire pretending to be permanent. None of the civilians moving through its corridors knew that the communication grid around them had already been seeded years ago by a patient human hand. Now those seeds came alive. The warning Earth had sent to the harvester fleet was copied, amplified, and shoved into open channels all across the network. It leapt through relay nodes, merchant bands, labor feeds, military spillover traffic, maintenance loops, and public comm towers. Within an hour it had reached hundreds of systems. It did not arrive as rumor. It arrived as proof. A human voice on a Dominion military frequency, speaking not with desperation, but with command. Do not come here. Across the galaxy, beings who had forgotten what defiance sounded like stopped what they were doing and listened. On Wrath Prime, deep in a mine where stone-skinned laborers had spent 8 centuries carving wealth from the dark for masters they never saw, the message burst through hijacked speakers and rolled down the tunnels like distant thunder. Tools stopped. Machinery kept grinding for a few stunned seconds before workers shut it down by hand. A massive laborer named Corvin stood still as the words ended, dust hanging around him in the stale light. He had led a hidden resistance for 20 years and had trained himself never to hope too quickly. Hope got people killed. Hope made you careless. But this was not a rumor. Somewhere out there, a species the Dominion had marked for harvest had looked back into the mouth of the machine and told it no. Corvin slowly closed his fist around the handle of his drill until the metal bent. On the water world of Pelagius, elders gathered in submerged chambers and replayed the transmission again and again through vibrating shell conduits. On border stations crowded with conquered peoples, beings who had spent their entire lives lowering their eyes when Dominion patrols passed now stared openly at public screens. In cargo holds, mess halls, maintenance decks, slave barracks, refinery tunnels, and forgotten moons, the same reaction moved like a spark through dry brush. It was not courage. Not yet. It was recognition. The Dominion could be challenged. That possibility alone was enough to make the Empire more fragile than it knew. On Threx Prime, the reaction was different. Grand Arbiter Vorith listened to the leaked transmission in his private chamber while a trembling aide stood a careful distance away. When the message ended, Vorith turned off the recording and said nothing. He sat in silence for 10 full seconds, and the aide felt each second like another tightening loop around his throat. At least 400 systems have heard it, the aide said at last. Several subject populations are showing signs of unrest. Vorith rose from his seat with smooth, insectal precision. They always become restless when they smell weakness. The aide lowered his gaze. Yes, Grand Arbiter. Which is why there will be no weakness, Vorith said. Commander Draxus will proceed. He will break the human fleet, burn their cities, and send their leaders to the camps. We will broadcast the fall of Earth on every channel in the Dominion. Let every conquered species watch hope die in real time. The words were flat, administrative, more terrifying for how ordinary they sounded. The aide bowed and withdrew. The matter, from Vorith's point of view, was settled. But in a dark archive room elsewhere in the capital, Scribe Leon was still digging through ghosts. Every hidden document she opened made the original warning feel less like an overreaction and more like a prophecy. Survey notes. Behavioral projections. Classified appendices buried so deep they had likely not been read in centuries. Piece by piece, a picture emerged that no one in power had wanted to preserve. Humanity did not merely survive pressure. It metabolized it. War sharpened it. Scarcity disciplined it. Catastrophe made it inventive. The more complete the threat, the more dangerous the response. Leon's hands shook as she read. Potential apex predator species. Not because humans were naturally the strongest. Because if they were attacked and allowed to live through it, they learned too much too quickly. They turned trauma into doctrine. Loss into infrastructure. Fear into preparation. She tried once more to warn Draxus. Authorization denied. She stared at the rejection and felt something close to pity for the fleet moving toward Sol. 2 light years from Earth, the Harvester fleet made its final jump calculations. Commander Draxus stood with his arms folded behind his back, eyes fixed on the tactical display. He had ordered full readiness across all ships. Gunnery crews were primed. Planetary suppression systems were green. Boarding contingents were staged. The human transmission had unsettled his officers, but now routine was reasserting itself through procedure. Checklists steadied the weak. Numbers steadied everyone else. Jump solution confirmed, a navigation officer said. Draxus nodded once. Take us in. Across 10,000 ships, slip drives ignited. Space bent. The Harvester fleet vanished from the staging dark and fell toward the Sol system with all the confidence of an empire still certain that history belonged to it. On Earth, beneath the Himalayas, Admiral Drake watched the movement register on the holodisplay. No expression crossed his face. The enemy had crossed the threshold. Now the trap would close. The Harvester fleet emerged at the edge of the Sol system expecting resistance. It found silence. Commander Draxus stood on the bridge of the Teeth of Obedience and stared at the sensor display with a hardening expression. No defense stations. No patrol formations. No orbital screens massing around the outer planets. The system looked exactly like what the Dominion records had promised: planets, moons, scattered rock, and a prey species too primitive to defend its own sky. For a moment, the human warning began to feel small again. A performance. A bluff wrapped in stolen intelligence. Draxus let his sharp teeth show in the faintest hint of a grin. "Standard approach," he said. "We take the third planet." Orders moved through 10,000 ships. The fleet pushed inward in conquest formation, heavy elements protected by layered screens, carriers and suppression platforms aligned for a rapid collapse strike. It was the kind of formation that had ended civilizations. Even the officers still unsettled by the human transmissions seemed to breathe easier as procedure took over. Numbers steadied them. Silence comforted them. There was nothing in the system that matched the threat in that message. Then every sensor on every ship screamed at once. It was not a warning tone any of them recognized. It was a raw mechanical shriek, system after system lighting red in the same instant. Across the bridge, officers flinched as displays flooded with impossible scan activity. Not one source. Not 10. Everywhere. Every angle. Every ship in the fleet was being mapped simultaneously by something they could not detect, could not target, and could not identify. Shield harmonics. Weapon signatures. Drive architecture. Thermal envelopes. Crew density. Command hierarchy. The fleet was being opened like a body on a table. "Find the source," Draxus snapped. His sensor crews worked frantically. Their hands moved. Their screens updated. Their answers did not change. "Nothing, Commander." "That is not an answer. We are reading the scans, but there is no origin point. No visible platform. No traceable emitter. The system still appears empty." Empty. Yet something invisible had just learned everything about them in seconds. Deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, Admiral Drake watched the enemy fleet bloom across his holographic display in perfect detail. The Spectre grid had done its work. Thousands of cloaked sensor platforms hidden across the solar system had read every Dominion ship cleanly and fed the data into Earth's war room. Tags appeared beside each contact. Tonnage. Shield profile. Weapon loadout. Vulnerabilities. Human officers around the chamber stood in disciplined silence, but beneath that discipline something fierce was building. After 60 years of preparation, the enemy was finally inside the map. "They're passing Neptune," a tactical officer said. Drake nodded once. "Activate the cage." The command raced outward. Among the asteroid belts and silent rock fields, devices no larger than fists woke from decades of sleep. Thousands of microsatellites hidden among drifting stone powered on together and began broadcasting a resonance pattern tuned for one purpose only: Dominion slipspace disruption. Invisible waves spread through the system in overlapping bands. On the bridge of the Teeth of Obedience, a new alarm tore through the confusion. "Commander, slip drives are offline." Draxus turned so sharply that one of his officers recoiled. "Explain." "All ships reporting the same failure. We cannot generate a slip window. Interference pattern unknown. It is coming from across the entire battle space." The bridge fell into a deeper silence than before. The meaning was immediate. They could not retreat. The fleet that had entered Sol as conquerors had just become trapped inside it. Draxus forced his voice steady. "It does not matter. We have 10,000 warships. Whatever they have hidden here, we will crush it. Reform battle lines. Maximum forward speed." The fleet obeyed. It pushed deeper toward the inner system, angry now, stripped of its easy confidence but not yet of its power. And that was when the second phase began. Launch doors opened in places the Dominion had never thought to examine. Asteroids split at the seams. Dark moons turned and shed armored covers. Silent orbital shells cracked wide. What came out was not a fleet. It was a swarm. Billions of autonomous drones poured into space in coordinated black rivers, each one barely larger than a bird, each one built for speed, precision, and sacrifice. They did not go for hull kills. They went for blindness. Sensor nodes, antenna clusters, communications spines, navigation arrays, external relays. They struck in layers, wave after wave, replacing every loss with 10 more machines. Point defense guns lit the dark. Too slow. Too few. Too late. Across the Harvester fleet, ships began dropping off shared tactical awareness. Formation links broke. Screens filled with static and false returns. Command traffic fragmented into bursts of noise and dead air. The most powerful fleet ever sent to erase a single world was suddenly fighting for the right to see. Draxus watched one bridge display after another collapse into chaos. For the first time in 40 campaigns, certainty cracked. On the outer edge of the system, hidden beyond the blindness and noise, 200 human stealth dreadnoughts waited in frozen darkness with their weapons cold and their crews silent. Captain Yuki Tanaka stared at the tactical feed as the Dominion formation unraveled inside the box. Then Admiral Drake's voice came over the channel. "The enemy is blinded," he said. "Phase 3 is authorized." Tanaka rose slowly from her chair. "All ships," she said, "decloak." 200 stars appeared in the outer dark. That was how it looked to the surviving Dominion sensors when the human dreadnoughts dropped their cloaking fields all at once. One moment there had been only the blind confusion of static, broken formations, and drone interference. The next, 200 hard points of light ignited at the edge of the battle space and began moving inward at impossible speed. Commander Draxus felt the shift on his bridge before the first reports came in. Unknown capital contacts. 200 confirmed. No, more signatures behind the jamming. Then the first human salvo hit. Kinetic accelerator rounds slammed through the lead Dominion ships at a significant fraction of light speed. Heavy armor that had endured plasma sieges and orbital wars punched inward like wet paper under the impact. Antimatter torpedoes followed, detonating against shield layers already destabilized by the drone swarms. Dominion formations that had entered the system like an iron wall came apart in sprays of fire, ruptured hull plating, and expanding debris fields. Captain Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the EWS Consequence and watched the first line of enemy ships die. Her ship was 300 meters of black geometry and light-absorbing armor, designed not to be seen until the moment it chose violence. Around her, 199 sister vessels drove forward in perfect formation discipline, years of concealment turning instantly into attack velocity. Human targeting systems fed on the data harvested by the Spectre grid. Every shot had already been chosen long before the fleet arrived. Primary wave collapsing, her tactical officer said. Tanaka did not smile. Roll firing pattern. Hit their command spine. The dreadnoughts moved like a blade through flesh. They did not waste fire on drama. They cut out coordination. Command carriers. Signal hubs. Fleet relays. Shield synchronizers. Human doctrine did not care where the Dominion looked strongest. It cared where the enemy would fall apart fastest once the right bones were broken. Across the battle space, the result was immediate. A Harvester fleet built to overwhelm weaker species with scale had never needed to fight blind against an opponent that was faster, quieter, and catastrophically better prepared. Dominion cruisers turned to meet threats that had already shifted position. Carrier groups tried to regroup and found their communications dead. Ships fired into drone clouds, into false signatures, into empty dark. Others never fired at all before human rounds ripped through them. The battle lasted less than 3 hours. By the end of it, 10,000 ships had become 600. Those survivors drifted damaged and scattered through the system, trying desperately to restore drives, restore contact, restore something of the confidence that had carried them here. But the cage still held. The drones still moved. The human dreadnoughts were still out there, invisible again between firing runs, deciding who lived another minute and who did not. On the bridge of the Teeth of Obedience, Sparks fell from ruptured consoles and small fires burned unchecked in corners where dead crew no longer sat. Half of Draxus's bridge personnel were gone. Blood darkened the deck. The flagship shuddered under repeated damage alarms, its systems failing in layers. The fleet he had commanded for years no longer existed in any meaningful sense. Draxus stood in the wreckage and sent one final transmission to Threx Prime through a communications array barely able to hold coherence. "They knew everything," he said. His voice sounded different to his own ears. Thinner. Emptier. "They were ready. We are lost. Do not send more ships. Do not come to this system. They are not what we thought they were." The message left the dying flagship and made its way toward the heart of the Dominion. Admiral Drake received it at the same moment. He read the captured transmission in the war room beneath the mountains while the ruined Harvester fleet floated across his display. Around him, officers waited for the next order. The tactical logic was obvious. Finish them. Erase the survivors. Send back Silence. Instead, Drake said, "Drop the cage." His tactical officer looked up sharply. "Admiral? Let them leave. They will report everything." "Yes," Drake said. "That is the point." The room fell still. Drake opened a direct channel to the surviving Dominion ships. His face appeared across damaged bridges and burning command decks throughout the retreating enemy force. Scarred. Human. Entirely unhurried. "This is Admiral Soren Drake of the Void Wardens," he said. "You are free to leave. Go home. Tell your masters what happened here. Tell them we were merciful today. Tell them not to make us be anything else." Across 600 crippled ships, crews listened in silence. The cage deactivated. One by one, the survivors turned and limped toward escape vectors, generating slip windows the moment the system released them. They fled as fast as damaged drives could carry them, leaving behind the wreckage of 9,400 warships drifting through the asteroid belt. But the battle did not end when they ran. Across the galaxy, a secret network of enslaved species known as the Watchers had been recording everything. They had tapped the fleet's own communications relays. They had seen the warning, the trap, the blindness, the slaughter, and the mercy. Now they broadcast it all outward. On world after world, beings watched Dominion warships burn. They watched the symbols of 11,000 years of rule break apart in silence. They watched a species no one had taken seriously stand alone against the most feared military force in the galaxy and dismantle it with cold precision. And on Threx Prime, Grand Arbiter Vorith began reading the battle analysis. By the time he reached the final pages, his hands had started to tremble. Not because the Dominion had lost a fleet. Because the humans had not used everything. Grand Arbiter Vorith read the battle analysis 3 times. The first reading told him the scale of the disaster. 10,000 ships reduced to wreckage. 600 survivors released only because the humans had chosen to release them. The second reading told him what mattered more. Human casualty estimates were low. Energy expenditure was controlled. Weapon deployment was selective. The enemy had not emptied its arsenal to survive. It had measured its response. The third reading was the one that made his hands tremble. The humans had likely fought the Harvester fleet with less than half of their available military capability. He lowered the tablet and sat in silence while the walls of his private chamber seemed to close inward around him. Defeat could be avenged. Fleets could be rebuilt. But this was something worse than defeat. This was humiliation with witnesses. Across the galaxy, conquered species had watched Dominion ships burn. Worse, they had watched those ships flee. An empire built on inevitability could survive losses. It could not survive the idea that it could be beaten. By the time Vorith entered the council chamber, chaos was already waiting for him. Military hardliners demanded immediate retaliation. Bureaucrats shouted over shattered supply models and sector instability. Political blocs that had spent centuries pretending unity now tore at each other in the open. Vorith stood above them all on the raised platform, black-eyed and perfectly still, until the chamber finally quieted. "The humans surprised us," he said. "That is all." The lie hung in the chamber like smoke. They prepared in secrecy. They destroyed a single fleet through deception and home ground advantage. This is not the fall of the Dominion. It is a lesson, and we will answer it with appropriate force. He turned toward his commanders. Assemble the Grand Armada. Every carrier, every warship, every mobile platform. 200,000 ships. We will not conquer Earth. We will erase it. This time the chamber erupted. Hardliners pounded approval into their desks. Moderates remained silent, but silence had long ago stopped being a form of resistance in that room. The order moved outward at once, and all across Dominion territory, military infrastructure began to bend toward one single purpose. Not everyone on Threx Prime was cheering. Counselor Metha listened to the decree from her private office and saw what others either missed or refused to name. Vorith was not acting from strength. He was acting from terror wrapped in ceremony. Empires at their most dangerous were often the ones most afraid, and fear on that scale did not produce caution. It produced overreach. That night, Scribe Leon came to her. Small, shaking, carrying a data tablet like evidence in a murder case, Leon placed the buried Earth survey on Metha's desk and said only, "Read." Metha did. The anomalous aggression adaptation loop. The classification risk. The recommendation for permanent avoidance. The suppressed warning. The possibility that humanity, if threatened and allowed to adapt, could become an apex predator species. When she finished, Metha closed her eyes for several seconds. He knew, Leon whispered. Or he should have known. And now he is sending 200,000 ships, Metha said. They looked at each other in the quiet and shared the same thought without speaking it aloud. If the First Fleet had only awakened the humans, what would an extermination campaign do? Far from Threx Prime, on Station Orin 4, Salem Marchetti stopped pretending. For 11 years she had lived under a false identity, trading minerals, smiling at customs officers, and planting quiet connections among the conquered. Now she stepped into the station's main trading hall and called an open meeting. Representatives from 14 subject species came, some out of curiosity, some out of anger, some because after the battle at Sol they no longer knew what rules still mattered. Marchetti stood before them without disguise. "I am not a traitor," she said. "I am an ambassador of Earth." The room tightened. "My people have spent 60 years watching the Dominion. We know what they do. We know the harvests, the camps, the stripped worlds, the engineered famines, the forced labor, the disappeared children, the erased histories. They are coming for us again with everything they have. We are not asking you to kneel to us. We are not asking you to serve us. We are asking whether you are done kneeling to them." No one answered at first. Then Corvin of Wrath Prime stepped forward from the rear of the hall. The stone-skinned giant had traveled in secret after hearing Earth's warning and watching the battle recording. His voice was deep enough to seem felt rather than heard. "My people have waited 800 years for proof that the Dominion can bleed," he said. "You gave us that proof." One by one, others followed. Aquatic elders from Pelagus. Winged pilots from the Sarah colonies. Crystalline strategists, tunnel fighters, scavenger clans, dock labor cells, officer deserters, old rebels who had nearly forgotten why they had begun. Distrust did not vanish. Old hatreds did not disappear. But something heavier than history entered the room. Possibility. Back on Earth, Admiral Drake studied the deployment schedule of the approaching Grand Armada and the emptying sectors behind it. When he addressed his commanders and the first Allied representatives, his voice remained as calm as it had been on the day the First Fleet arrived. "They are pulling everything to the front," he said. "Which means behind them, the Empire is going hollow." Corvin understood first. "We strike the rear," he said. Drake nodded. "Yes. While they come for Earth, the species they enslaved will begin taking their worlds back." Across the map, red Dominion movement lines stretched toward Sol like a river of blood. And everywhere behind that river, the first fires of rebellion were already starting to burn. The Grand Armada crossed Dominion space like a moving eclipse. 200,000 warships advanced toward Sol in a formation so vast that civilian traffic fled sectors days before it arrived. Supply chains bent beneath it. Border worlds went dark as garrisons were stripped and folded into the march. On every public channel still under Dominion control, Grand Arbiter Vorith broadcast the same promise in the same cold voice. There would be no conquest. There would be no integration. There would be extinction. Across the galaxy, conquered worlds heard him. And on those worlds, something began to answer. A mining garrison on Wrath Prime fell in less than an hour when laborers came up from the deep tunnels carrying human-made breaching charges and improvised rifles built around Dominion ammunition. A supply depot on Pelagius vanished under coordinated sabotage from workers who had spent generations learning the schedules of their own oppression. Relay stations went dark. Fuel convoys burned. Occupation troops disappeared between one patrol report and the next. Then the uprising spread wider. Entire planets declared independence while the Empire's main strength was still racing toward Earth. The Dominion had spent 11,000 years teaching the galaxy a single lesson: obey or die. Now that lesson was being returned with interest. At the edge of the Sol system, Admiral Drake stood in the war room and watched the red flood of the Grand Armada approach his lines. Around Earth and across the system, human and allied fleets held position. 12,000 ships against 200,000. The numbers were absurd enough to tempt despair, but despair had never been part of Protocol Prometheus. The point had never been to match the Dominion ship for ship. It had been to shape the battlefield until numbers became a weakness. Armada entering outer engagement envelope, a tactical officer said. Drake gave a single nod. Hold all lines. Let them commit. The first collision came at the cage. Resonance fields rose across the asteroid belts and thousands of Dominion vessels lost slip capability the moment they crossed into the web. There would be no clean withdrawal. No fast correction. The system itself had become a locking mechanism. Behind that came the weapon. Platforms hidden among rock and ice. Kinetic fire and plasma lances tore into the leading edge of the Armada, smashing thousands of ships before the main fleet even reached the inner lanes. It slowed them. It bloodied them. It did not stop them. Nothing that large stopped quickly. Then came the swarm. Human drone reserves launched first, black rivers pouring through the dark, but this time they were joined by allied additions. Wrath magnetic disruptors that shattered targeting cohesion. Pelagius corrosive pods that ate through hull seams. Sarah sensor benders that filled enemy scopes with false formations and phantom vectors. The drone cloud did not simply blind the Armada. It made the Armada distrust its own eyes. Still the Dominion pushed inward. They tightened formations. Layered shields. Burned through losses. Used mass the way empires always used it, as if enough weight could crush reality into obedience. And for a while it worked. Sections of the defensive line buckled. Allied ships died in brilliant pieces. Corvin led a squadron of rebuilt Wrath warships straight into a Dominion command group and rammed the lead carrier hard enough to tear both vessels open. He survived in an escape pod. Many of his people did not. Elsewhere, Sarah pilots flew impossible intercepts through debris storms. Pelagius crews fought in pressure-sealed hulls half full of water and would not yield a corridor once they had taken it. Species the Dominion had called weak discovered, in battle, that weakness had mostly been enforced. But the Armada kept coming. At its center, under direct command authority, 50,000 of the Dominion's heaviest warships broke through the outer layers and drove toward Earth in a concentrated kill push. In the war room, tension tightened visibly across human faces. This was the moment every earlier sacrifice had been buying. Drake looked at the display and spoke the words that had existed in planning documents for decades. Authorize Protocol Prometheus. Full activation. Deep inside the sun, machinery older than most of the officers in the room woke fully at last. For 30 years, human engineers had hidden stellar taps beneath the violence of the solar surface and linked them through relays across the inner system. No one in the galaxy had imagined weaponizing a star because imagination tended to break long before reaching that scale. Humanity had not broken first. The Soulfire array aligned. Then the sun answered. Beams of concentrated solar plasma lanced across the system carrying the heat of a stellar core. Dominion formations vanished under the strike, not damaged, not broken, simply erased. Shields ceased to matter. Armor ceased to matter. Ships hit by the array did not explode dramatically. They became gas. The kill push collapsed in seconds. At the front of the wreckage, Draxus Moore's repaired flagship drove stubbornly onward, scarred and burning, trying to force one final blow through the storm. Captain Yuki Tanaka intercepted above Mars. The duel that followed was savage, close, and brief. Both ships tore each other apart. Tanaka ordered evacuation before the consequence died. Draxus did not. As his bridge broke around him, he looked once at the blue world ahead and said quietly, "They deserve their freedom." Then his ship vanished. After that, the will of the Armada broke all at once. Some Dominion ships surrendered. Others ran the moment corridors opened. Across occupied space, rebellions surged into full war as news of the collapse spread faster than official denials could follow. On Threx Prime, power failed district by district. Guards abandoned their posts. The streets filled. Grand Arbiter Vorith sat alone in his darkening chamber until the door opened and Scribe Leon stood there, small and steady at last. "You were warned," she said. Then she left him with the silence he had earned. The Dominion fell within days, not because Earth conquered it, but because fear had been the only thing holding it together, and fear had finally broken. When the fighting ended, the newly freed worlds gathered into the Free Systems Accord. They asked Earth to lead. Drake refused the throne before it could be offered twice. "We are not your rulers," he said. "We are not your saviors. We are your neighbors." That was how the age ended. Not with a coronation. Not with a speech inside a palace. With a galaxy looking toward a small blue planet and realizing the species that had broken the Empire had not come to replace it. Only to make sure no one knelt again.